request those who are seated at the back to please come in front, if you don't mind. It does help the speaker to have a full inner. And the second reason is we sometimes do have latecomers. We don't stop them because we are aware people get caught in traffic. There are many people who use public transport. So at least the younger and more agile members, I'll request you to shift if possible. Thank you. It's a great privilege to renew old ties and also forge new ones, especially because the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, since the time it's established in 1966, seeks to commemorate the life and work of Jawaharlal Nehru. It does so in a host of ways, the most well-known being the museum and grounds and the various historic exhibits. But this library, the archives it houses, the collection of books, the scholars and students who come here, the fellowship program we have, and as important as those, afternoons and evenings such as this one, keep the heritage and spirit of Jawaharlal Nehru alive, in the sense that they promote a plural culture and attitude where one is open to other ideas, even as one holds on to one's own beliefs. It's a privilege, therefore, to welcome all of you on this evening. It's also important for us because the institutions go through processes of introspection and self-correction. And as an institution, we did fail to organize this lecture for some years for reasons which I can't and won't go into. But we want to renew this as an annual practice and also assure you that this process of renewal will now not come with any interruption. Before I introduce our very distinguished speaker for the day, I will request Mrs. Krishna Dutt to say a few words about Srikant Dutt, who I grew up knowing about but did not have the privilege of knowing. Mrs. Dutt has worked as an anthropologist in the Planning Commission for a very long stretch from the first 5-year plan 1952 until the 6th. She's also worked for 12 years in the IGNCA on the issue of tribal art, whereas in the Planning Commission, a lot of her work in very early years concerned a category which was to become quite important in Indian politics and remains so to this day, the backward classes. So I now call upon Mrs. Dutt to say a few words about the very fine young scholar whose memory this lecture commemorates.
Thank you. Srikant was brought to India as he was 5-year-old child in 1958, and he was a remarkable young boy who mixed with all the children around our house and went in and out of all the houses, although he didn't know anything Hindi and other children didn't know English, but they had a fine time going around. I'm just telling you this to say that he was such a remarkable young boy. And he used to be, he studied in City and Country School in New York. His mother was very progressive idea. Mary, her name was. And he used to come every Christmas holiday to Delhi, and he loved his grandparents, my mother and father. And by 61, we had built a house in Lajpat Nagar, and he used to come there as well. After he finished his high school, 64-65, he went to Japan to teach English to Japanese businessmen. And he would come back with whatever he had earned and present it to his grandmother, telling her that now you can go to the pilgrimage wherever you want to. By that time my father had passed away. And it was the time, 1970, when India and Pakistan were at war. India wanted to for Bangladesh was born. Somehow or other Srikant went to Calcutta and joined some Mukti Bahini youngsters and went with them to Dhaka. So I asked him, how could you go? You have an American passport. He says, no, but I left the passport with my aunt. Then I went there. And his main idea was to see how the new nation was going to be set up. And from there, Dhaka, he went to Barisal, that is our ancestral town, and we had a house there called Ashwini Bhavan, that is my grandfather's uncle's name. So he went to Barisal and he told me, after coming back, he told me, I saw a lot of dead bodies floating on the river. And fortunately, there was one very distant relation who was still living there. When he found Srikant was there, and they were very happy to have him as their guest. And he went to the house, and he says the house was empty. There was nothing there except Smokey's roll-top desk. He used to call my father Smokey because my father used to smoke constantly. And iron chest, which I had described to him my reminiscence of that house. Anyway, he came back and he went to the hills. Before that, when he was around, after just finishing his schooling, when he came to India, and he went with me, I said, I want to go to Bombay, and so he says, I will come with you. So he came with me, and we went to Bombay. From Bombay, we went to Bangalore. From Bangalore to Halibut, Belur, and from there we went off to Madras, and he was absolutely fascinated with the sculptures and the old temple things. Kaneri was his favorite place. And from Mahabalipuram he went there also. And then we came back, and he had gone all over India practically. I don't even know the places he went to. In Calcutta he met Bhupen Hazarika, and he told me about him, that he had come, and he met so many people, I mean, of all states, young people and also older, professors and politicians and all. He also went to Nepal, and there Sikkim, he went Sikkim, and then he went to Nepal. Nepal, he had a big chat with the Koirala. What was his? NP Koirala. And he had written all this down, but we couldn't sort of decipher the most of it. And I told him, he came back, and then he said it was 1981 or so. He gave up his passport. I said, why did you do that? Why do you have to leave your passport? He says, I don't want to be an American anymore. I would rather take Indian passport. I said, but with Indian passport you will not be able to visit a lot of places. He loved traveling all over the place. In fact, he had gone to Belize, which I had never heard of. And then he had walked, after he finished his schooling, at my insistence to my brother that please send him to Europe and let him find out how others are. So he had walked all over Europe, and from Turkey he came back through Pakistan to India. He had a little trouble in Pakistan, but ultimately he was able to manage to come. So he had this yen for traveling, all over the place. And when he gave up his passport and his mother was very unhappy about it, he says, no, but you, Pishima, you don't know. Government of India don't stop the academics from going to other places, even if you can't go there as a tourist or in other official thing. So there is no trouble with me if I had given up the passport, and I'll apply for the Indian passport soon. And he had also applied for a assistant professor.
Yeah, he did his master's and then PhD from the London School of Economics, and then decided to come and take up a job here, take Indian citizenship, and then settle in India in 81. And in November 81, he met with an accident, and he didn't survive the accident.
He died on 3rd December 1981.
He was 27 then.
He was a very remarkable person who was loved by not only our extended family, but after he died, there was a deluge of letters in small letters all over the world practically. We got letters from everywhere.
And he had 3 books and 48 publications to his credit, before he passed away.
He was a remarkable person. That's all.
Also want to place on record that our association continues not only because of the endowment which was given by the Dutt family and the lecture, but it's tradition in this lecture for the family to make a further endowment which has been made today. So I think we should show our I think the sadness of his demise will always stay, particularly with those who are privileged enough to have known him. We must, at the same time, acknowledge not only the breadth and sheer corpus of his writing, which frankly people twice his age would find very difficult to equal, but also note that a lot of his writing was drawn on scholarly materials, not just in this institution, but in this very building, both for his doctoral dissertation and for the essays. In that sense, we feel that our association with him and his memory is an enduring one. Our role, of course, is extremely small, but it is very valuable, very important for an institution such as this one. I'm especially happy, therefore, to welcome today a very distinguished scholar of our times, Professor Udayan Mishra, who has worked for many years as professor at the Dibrugarh University in Assam, from where he retired. I don't think he needs an introduction to such a distinguished audience. I'd just like to say that there was a time when one of the well-known bookshops in Delhi caught up with me some years ago, I think, sir, and wanted to know who is this author, because this book, Periphery Strikes Back, published by the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, had sold, I think, 12 copies in a day, and they were not quite expecting it. It took some explaining that this is one of the few works which between its covers dealt not only with Assamese nationalism or Naga nationalism, but placed it in a much wider perspective. It dealt with them in such a way that one rethought a whole lot of other issues and dimensions, not only about India, but about the questions of nationalism and the times we live in. And I'm, of course, referring to the book, The Periphery Strikes Back. Professor Mishra, when we approached him to give this lecture, immediately agreed. He said he'd require a day or two to suggest a title. It could not have been a more topical title, but it could not have been a title of more enduring relevance. Ethnic Homelands and Citizens' Rights, Professor Mishra.
Chairperson, Professor Mahesh Rangarajan, distinguished friends. It's a privilege as well as an honor for me to speak to you this afternoon in memory of a young and committed scholar who passed away very young. So my homage to his memory. The choice of the topic, actually, I did it on a spur of a moment when Mahesh asked me, because that was what was troubling all of us from the northeastern region at that time, particularly in the context of great violence that was there between different communities in the Homelands territorial area. But that was just the immediate motive for the selection of the topic. But there are, I think, much more important interfaces there, because I feel that I've been one who has always been writing, and people, I'm not saying for or against, but on the nationality issues of small nationalities. Mahesh has very kindly referred to the book also. But there comes a time when you start reviewing and reassessing and re-looking at what you have said. And I think that time actually has come now. And we are passing through very difficult times. And I think many of the fault lines in the creation of political spaces and territorial spaces need to be re-looked upon and reanalyzed. And that was the reason, exact reason why I chose this topic of ethnic homelands and citizens' rights. Now, there is enough strength to argue on both sides. You say small nationalities will naturally argue that this is our inherent right, and there are a lot of historical reasons for arguing strongly, because there is immigration, there is occupation of land, there is the total taking over of the tribal belts and blocks over a long historical process. I don't want to go into that, because I think enough has been written, and I have also written on the Boroland issue recently, calling it the burden of history. But today I would like to speak on something different, something which I think should be of a little bit of worry for all of us who are working on that region, or who are working about or on the Indian nation state, and how it's accommodating the demands of small nationalities over the years. So I think this presentation actually would try to examine some of the fault lines in the nation state's attempts to accommodate demands for separate ethnic homelands by carving out political and territorial units for certain ethnic groups, and the resultant problems centered around the rights of other small nationalities living in a heterogeneous region. So two points which I think surface immediately when we talk of ethnic homelands is that how heterogeneous is that homeland? Who are the other communities? Who are the other ethnic communities living in that particular area? And what are their rights? We would also try to address concerns, and I think this is a very important point of my presentation, concerns relating to gender inequality and the rights of individual citizens in relation to community rights as guaranteed by constitutional provisions in the country. And these are built around so-called traditional customs and practices of a particular ethnic group or community. I'm using the term alternately. Matters which come under the broad category of customary law and traditional rights. So I begin with a few questions. How does one really resolve individual citizenship rights and the traditional rights of a particular ethnic group or nationality? Also, how does one resolve the contradictions that are bound to arise when the rights of a particular community take precedence over the rights of other groups living in a particular ethnic homeland? Is it true that the Indian nation state, while carving out autonomous political units with a view to containing insurgent movements and populist agitations, has adopted an ad hoc approach, a very casual ad hoc approach, by severely compromising the citizenship rights of a large mass of people who do not belong to a particular ethnic group? And lastly, I think a very important question which has also been raised very pertinently by another scholar, Ranavir Samadar, when he says, how do you resolve the paradox between nationhood as a whole, or what one would say the system of public justice as a whole, with the question of exceptional autonomies? We have exceptional autonomies in our constitution. Naturally, we have the 6th schedule, we have Article 370, we have personal law. There are a lot of exceptional autonomies. But I think it's become a very, very difficult point, particularly in the northeastern region, when you try to resolve these exceptional autonomies with rights as guaranteed by the Constitution under Article 14, 29 to 29 and all the other rights. So that is exactly what I would like to talk. That can we have parallel legal structures where can we resolve the difference between a differential system of justice based on customary law, etc., and an equal system of public justice, but all the time remembering that one particular group can always dominate even that public space. So how do we resolve that particular contradiction? These and other queries would naturally form the core of today's presentation, although I am quite aware that there are too many questions. This is what I have been feeling right from the beginning, that there are too many questions and rather too few answers. And for that, I beg your apology. There will be perhaps, more questions than answers from my side. But one needs to appreciate that these questions themselves mark a very important stage in the Indian nation-state's experiment of nation building in the Northeast, and forms part of what I have referred to quite often as India's Northeast experience. I think there has been a lot of focus on state repression, naturally. We are very concerned about human rights. We are very concerned about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. We want its withdrawal. There are a lot of issues like this. And it is also true that almost every alternate day, someone is shot by the armed forces in the northeastern region. Maybe in Nagaland, maybe more so in Manipur and Assam now. So this is taken partly for granted. But I think when you talk of this, there's also another side to it. There's another side to it where you talk of the Indian Constitution, the changes that have been made in the Constitution to accommodate small nationalities who are never part of the Indian freedom struggle or the anti-colonial movement. And at the same time, you find the provision that has been made for customary laws and Sikh schedule provisions, which are becoming very problematic right now. That's what I would like to focus on. So another small point which I've always felt I should share with you is that very often scholars working on the Northeast, more so political commentators as well, I think they are all sucked in at some stage or other, and I'm also part to it. They've been sucked in by the collective passions of society. Now we've been passing through such difficult times, so much of public passion around, that it's just impossible to keep away. So the works from the Northeast, by and large, have been marked by two things. One is by element of collective passion, and secondly, by an element of immediacy of subject matter, that you deal with the immediate situation. And I think the Government of India's response also has been more from the point of view of immediacy of subject matter. That I shall come as I proceed. So I feel that to understand the complexities of the northeastern region, which I still feel is a very elusive construct, that it's so much filled with complexities and diversities that an administrative terminology called the Northeast, which was first used by the Christian missionaries, I think in the early 20s, doesn't actually do justice to the region, because it's an umbrella connotation which takes away so many things from our understanding of that very difficult and intricate place where you have more than 220 tribal groups and small nationalities. So, I think what is important for us about the region today, and I beg forgiveness for beginning with this, is the element of violence. And I think I don't want to blame the national media, as it is said. I don't want to blame the rest of the country's media or reporting. But I feel that it inevitably happens that violence, when it continues for a long time, gets to be trivialized. And violence in the Northeast has been increasingly trivialized, and we also get used to it. I remember there's a particular play by John Osborne written in the 50s, dealing with the depression of the 50s, where the central character, it's called Look Back in Anger, many of you might have read it. So the central character ultimately says that the greatest bane of living is that you get used to a situation. And I think we are all getting used to a particular situation in the Northeast. That is, we are getting quite used to seeing in our breakfast news a lot of violence, a lot of killing, which we naturally take in our stride. I think this trivializing of violence is something which needs to be thought upon and reflected, because it's a huge human tragedy that is unfolding. I shall come to it towards, again, the conclusion of my work. So, I think part of this is because of the creation of too many fragmentary spaces in the form of ethnic homelands and autonomous councils. We have more than a dozen autonomous councils in Assam. And I think it has led to the abridgment or nullification of the rights of other small nationalities, where the heavy mix of ethnicity and territory has created so many fragmentary spaces built on exclusivist rights of particular ethnic communities. Common binaries applicable to other parts of India, binaries such as majority, minority, or caste and non-caste, untouchability, Dalits, non-Dalits. I think many of these binaries really fall apart when you come to the Northeast. There are totally new binaries that come up. So, to understand the nature of the discourse centered around citizens' rights and ethnic homelands, I'm afraid we shall have to go back a little bit in history. Why this happened? Why the whole idea of rights and justice has become very problematic in the context of the Northeast. And I would also like to say that as far as autonomies are concerned, as autonomous regions, there might be exceptional autonomies which are provided for in the Constitution. But when you come to the basic structure of the Constitution, I think we talk of the fundamental rights of people, not of autonomies. So that also, comes up later on when we say, do we make these structures permanent, or is there any possibility of amending these structures for the future? So let us go a little back in history. I think why this whole background took place, and I presume all of you know about the apprehensions of the small nationalities in the northeastern region of India about becoming a part of the Indian Union. And if you take up any of the small nationalities, you will find they were very, very scared of becoming a part of India at that time in the transfer of power. And these apprehensions were multiplied actually suddenly when the cabinet mission announced the grouping scheme. And the moment the grouping scheme was announced, these small nationalities were even more frightened. They thought that ultimately we'll end up in a Pakistan. So this is where I think there was a lot of ferment. And in order to prevent that ferment from taking, militant shape, the Border Commission, the Commission on Small Tribes was set up, and the 6th schedule of the Constitution was incorporated during the Constituent Assembly debates. So very long debates over the rights of small nationalities that came up, and the 6th schedule was incorporated. And I suppose you are aware of the 6th schedule of the Constitution, Article 244 onwards, subsection 1, where you have provisions for district councils, elected district councils among the different ethnic nationalities. But when we talk of the district councils, I don't want to go into the details that I've written out in my paper. I'd just like to be brief. That when you come to the district councils, you suddenly find that they were elected bodies, all right. But the election was within the particular tribal group or the ethnic group. But what was more important is that their source of inspiration was the traditional structures of power. We have three structures of power in the Northeast, particularly in the ethnic homeland. One is the traditional structures of power, where you have the village, the range council, the village council, the tribal council, as you have in Nagaland, or you have different chiefs and the village councils, which are traditional structures of power. You have CMs, which are known as the small rajas in KNJ Hills and so on. So you have different traditional structures of power. Then you have the second one, which is basically the district council, supposed to be democratic, elected bodies of ethnic groups. And the third one, which is another parallel structure of power, is of course the legislative assembly in the states that were formed after the reorganization of undivided Assam in 1971. So my basic point about the district councils is that they have not been able to deliver what they were supposed to have delivered because of a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons is that their inspiration was actually the traditional structures of power. not any other democratic structures of power. And as a result, you find that the work of the district councils were reduced to very small local bodies, and that is exactly what happened. And they became quite redundant when the states were formed, because when Meghalaya was formed as a state out of the United Khasi and Jajia Hills district, the district councils became virtually redundant, because now you had an elected assembly where you had reservation of seats for the different tribal groups. So it became redundant. But nevertheless, they have continued their presence in many of these states. I would like to refer to the progressive role of the district council in 3 of the districts of Mizoram, where they did away with the system of chiefs who owned most of the land. So it had also a democratic content. I'm not denying it. But basically I feel that not enough of serious homework went into the creation of the 6th schedule, which was thought to be a sort of a mechanism to prevent further alienation of the tribal nationalities or the ethnic nationalities of the northeastern region. Now, having said this, we must conclude at least our discussion on the district councils by saying that they are at odds both with the traditional self-governing bodies and also with the government, constituted on the basis of adult suffrage and supposed to espouse liberal democratic principles such as individual citizenship rights, rule of law, and equal rights, etc. In many tribal societies covered by the 6th schedule, one witnesses the conflict between the district councils, which are constitutional bodies, and their traditional self-governing counterparts, between the values of constitutional politics and traditional forms of governance. In the process, and that is what is quite often overlooked, in the process of the struggle between these bodies, the rights of the citizens are usually compromised. So, most of these district councils actually have right over land, over revenue collection, but what I feel is most important is their role in the continuance of customary laws. Customary laws which are being attempted to be codified now, where there's a lot of resistance from women's groups that there should not be any codification till actually the gender question is addressed. I'm quoting from a recent report on customary laws and women's rights in Northeast India, it's a quote from there. The tribal societies which are being governed by different customary laws under the 6th schedule are facing legal and administrative problems because the exact nature of relationship between traditional institutions and statutory laws enacted by the state has not been clearly spelled out in the 6th schedule. This is a very important point, I feel. That's why I said that not enough reflection, not enough introspection went into the creation of the 6th schedule. It was more of a mechanism to meet an immediate situation, and the problems are gradually now surfacing as we are passing ahead in time. So going back to the Indian nation-state attempts to control the emerging situation of insurgency or of revolt, I think the process started, the ad hoc process started much earlier. It was not just after independence, not only through the Constituent Assembly. It started much earlier. And I would like to draw my reference from the Naga struggle. I refer to the Naga struggle because I still consider it to be one of the most potent and earliest challenges to the process of nation building in India. And it's one of the, I think, longest surviving insurgencies or militant struggles, whatever term you use, in not only in the Indian subcontinent, but I think in the world as a whole, it's one of the longest ones. So that way, I'm referring to one of the earliest agreements that was almost reached between the Naga National Council and the Government of India. That is in 1946, just a year or a few months before independence, towards the middle of 1946. Now, Sir Akbar Hydari was the governor. He was the representative of the Government of India. And the Nagas were supposed to have been represented by the Naga National Council. And if you look into the history of the Naga National Council, its formation, its origins, its class structure, you discover that it's basically drawn from particular middle class individuals. And it was, though I have myself written that the Naga National Council was the first organization in Nagaland which used the word national, which laid the foundation of Naga nationalism. But still, when I look back now, I feel that its claim to represent all the Naga tribes was not a complete claim. It was a half claim. And the agreement that was arrived at with the Government of India, which is known as the Hydari Agreement, which gave full right to the Naga National Council to collect revenue over customary law, over land rights. It was a very sweeping sort of arrangement which the Government of India had almost reached with the Naga National Council. And I think it was, what was overlooked was the fact that it was not an elected body in any sense. And the agreement would have come through, but for clause 10, which said that after 10 years we would go back and see, we would go back and revise, and the NNC leadership had by then passed off to Angami Zapo Fizo, who said nothing doing, after 10 years we will not be with India. So it fell through. But that's not important. The important point which I want to make is that there is an element of ad hocism. There is an element of trying to work out a solution as a mechanism to stave off or to keep off, a situation reaching a crisis point. So that's why I said that they said it's a very important clause in the agreement related to customary law. And it reads, all cases, whether civil or criminal, arising between Nagas in the Naga Hills. Now when you talk of the Nagas now, you talk of the different tribes, you talk of the sense of autonomy that is inherent in each Naga tribe, and that explains partly the alternative voices in the Naga movement. It was never a total homogeneous movement as even people like us tried to portray at one time when we wrote about the Naga national question. But there are a lot of heterogeneity in the Naga situation. There are a lot of independent alternate voices which didn't find expression till about 10 years ago because of the power and might of the Naga insurgent group, which was called the National Socialist Council of Nagaland. So the whole suppression and the resultant silent voices have gradually come to the surface now. So when they said that almost everything in the Naga Hills would be controlled by the Naga National Council, and they said that Naga customary law may be introduced in the with the consent of the duly recognized Naga representative organization. Representative organizations was the term that was used in the argument. So I feel that there was that actually did not apply at all to the agreement with the Naga National Council. So that I am referring to primarily to show that the Government of India has had that tendency, which was there also in colonial times. If you go back to the colonial times, there is a lot of writing about how the British allowed the different tribes to live according to their own laws. But this was more a mechanism of colonial rule where they didn't want to invest anything, invest any capital in the development of the Naga Hills. And now, of course, several Naga scholars have also maintained that this policy of non-interference was not a policy of benign policy, but a policy which served the colonial functionaries. And that's why it happened. So I think this idea of trying to arrive at arrangements to create ethnic homelands is an idea which was not seriously reflected upon. Now, the next step from the Hydari Agreement was the 16-point agreement, on the basis of which the Nagaland state was created, and the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of India was done. And here also is defined that the whole question of customary laws and the idea of legislation, rights over resources, everything was done in the 13th Amendment. Now this amendment, I feel, is a very important amendment. I refer to the accommodative power of the Indian Constitution, its resilience in certain ways. And I still feel that this amendment is the first amendment in post-independent India where people are given the rights over resources. Land and its resources shall belong to the Naga people. That is what is there in that. And that is where now, a lot of debate is centered around whether you will allow the oil companies or the national oil corporations to work there without paying direct royalty to the Naga people. So it is a very important change in the Indian Constitution, and I feel the parameters of the Constitution were expanded for the first time to include small nationalities. Nonetheless, I feel that the whole position of customary law needs to be defined. Enough work was not done, enough introspection was not done, and I would refer to only one major point there, that is the question of women's rights. And the more you go into customary laws, the more you go into, tradition, the more you realize that tradition also has the tyranny of tradition. It's not necessary, as it is very commonly romanticized, that whoever is old is wise, and that is where the village council comes in. That's not true. And a lot of romanticizing of the situation has been done. I feel that the women's question is a very important question in Nagaland. And for those of you who are not aware, actually there has been a persistent refusal to accept reservation for women in the Nagaland Assembly. So they passed a resolution recently saying that as per customary law, there cannot be any reservations for women in the traditional bodies, something which the women's bodies have been demanding. So women are completely out of the decision-making process in the traditional bodies, and because district councils draw their inspiration from the traditional bodies, even in the district councils and Meghalaya, etc., you do not have a particular presence of women. So it's an enduring fight that is going on. Right now, it was struck down by the Guwahati High Court on the plea that the constitutional amendment says that customary laws cannot be violated, but now it's being heard by a full bench of the Guwahati High Court, and everyone is keeping fingers crossed as to whether the customary law will be touched or not. And I feel that making it a permanent structure of a society would be suicidal in the long run as far as gender rights are concerned. Now, there's another example also in Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh is one of the few ethnic homelands where you have the panchayat system, which is, I think, much more effective than the district council. Now, here also, there's a lot of demand for codification of customary law. And most of these customary laws are very regressive in nature and anti-women. And as a result, the demand for the 73rd Amendment to be introduced there has also been rejected. So I'm just referring to what one of the leaders of women's rights, Jeju Mete, has to say. She says, why should it be that women alone should bear the onus of tribal tradition while men get away with non-tribal behavior in the name of modernity? So despite demands by women's rights organizations for the eradication of forced marriages, child marriages, multiple marriages, and for an uniform system of solemnization of weddings, and for the encouragement of intertribe marriages, as well as for the better treatment of women, keeping in view the changes in society, the Arunachal Pradesh government refused to accept any of these demands, and in February 1989 passed a bill called the Protection of Customary Laws and Special Practices Bill. This was to give a seal to the customary laws. So it's not that there's a common feeling quite often outside that there's a lot of egalitarianism, there's a lot of gender equality in tribal societies, which is partly true. In certain situations it is there. But when you come to issues like forced marriages, child marriages, etc., I think you need legislation which will try to bring about gender equality. And that is where citizens' rights, I feel, have been severely compromised in ethnic homelands in the name of traditional culture and traditional customary law. Now, we refer to a little bit of constitutional provisions of traditional institutions of governance and individual rights. I think this is a very important issue. I don't want to go into great detail. If there are any questions, I'll answer. But I think, as I said, on the face of it, it appears to be partly true that most tribal societies in the northeastern region have an element of egalitarianism. There's no denying that. And this is also partly due to the very distinct land pattern. This is another topic which one needs to go into. So the whole concept of egalitarianism is again related to the common belief that land is still not a commodity. So that is one of the reasons. But this is certainly not the full story. There is another side to the story. And it must be said that in the changing circumstances following the introduction of the principles of representative democracy, community decision, or what is passed off as consensual democracy, cannot fully substitute democratic principles based on the rights of the individual citizen, precisely because such traditional institutions do not have, one, representation of women, two, there is little scope for dissent, and three, they are ethnocentric and exclusivist in character. So quite often these bodies which override the rights of the individual as against the rights of the community, and which have been given a legitimate status by the state, are burdened by the tyranny of custom, which often goes by the name of community rights, community consciousness, or time-honored traditional values. So I think basically, all are agreed there that not touching the customary laws is a very politically expedient position. You don't want to create more problems, so leave the customary laws as they are. So the state, as I say, takes a very indulgent view of the situation, and in the process, you find a lot of commissions that have been set up by the government of India, and each of these commissions on customary law have said, look, they are running the country, the place very well, don't touch them, let it stay. But in none of these reports by the different commissions set up by the government of India have women's rights featured as an important point. So that women have been excluded from the whole process of selection does not find mention in any of the official reports and suggestions. Now I come to a slightly different point. I come to not only the district councils or the representative bodies, but I come to the traditional structures of power, which are very important in the context of ethnic homelands. And these are now being seen as alternative models of democracy. Because why are they being considered as alternative models of democracy? I had brought in paper cuts where it said that the traditional chiefs or the rajas or the CMs, they have said, they have met the president, they have put in representation saying that our rights should be constitutionally accepted. Now this, I feel, is a very regressive situation in a democracy, where you are going back to the traditional chieftains and the rajas, because the Indian nation state has not been able to deliver distributive justice and development to these regions. And as a result of the reaction to the failure of distributive justice, I think common people still go back to their own traditional structures, which are so hierarchical, so patriarchal in so many matters, that I think it would be extremely regressive if we go back. But there's another small point that comes up when we talk of traditional structures of power, which I have found very fascinating, particularly in relation to the African experience. Now, the person who used traditional structures of power to build up his movement was Angavisa Professor. When the government of India wanted to introduce some elements of the 6th schedule into Nagaland, he and the Naga National Council said, no, we don't want the 6th schedule in Nagaland. We'll continue with our traditional structures of power. And immediately, I think it was a very, very intelligent and efficient move on the part of Fizo, that he came to an understanding with all the traditional bodies, that is the village chiefs, the village councils, the range councils. They have a very nice structure there. And he won over the traditional structures of power to what he believes to be the cause of Naga independence. And that explains the success of the plebiscite of 1951, where he had thousands and thousands of signatures. I wouldn't say that it covered the entire Naga population, but it did cover a substantial population. I would also not say whether every Naga knew that they were putting their signature or fingerprints for independence, but nonetheless, it was a collective exercise. And also the election boycott, the absolute successful election boycott of 1952, where not a single Naga citizen voted. So I think the success of this depended on Fizo's winning over the traditional structures of power. If you study the African experience in Nigeria and other countries, you find that with the emergence of the middle class, the first conflict that comes is between the emergent middle class leaders and the traditional chiefs and the traditional structures of power. And that is what was emerged by Fizo in Nagaland in a very successful manner. And that is what has given traditional structures of power tremendous longevity and credibility in the Naga context. And they also played a very important role during the military operations. They were the fire media between the villagers and the army. And ultimately today they have instituted a process of communitarianism, as they call it, where certain actions are carried out by the traditional structures of power. So that is there. But nonetheless, whatever is being done, the positives are being negated greatly by not giving enough space to women and I still feel there's a lot of resistance to the idea of individual dissent. Thirdly, I would like to end with territorial spaces and citizens' rights. Now, it's very easy, for the nation state to say that we would create a new territory, we would make it a new homeland for you, and that is the end of the matter. But that hasn't been the end of the matter. The creation of territorial spaces after the reorganization of 1971, new spaces, has not put an end to the big problem of silent voices in the Northeast. There are thousands of people who have been there for generations and who do not have a voice on any particular matter. They are just, outside of the decision-making process. And in the process, I think something very, very serious has occurred. That is, we have created a huge number of virtual non-state people in ethnic homelands. And this has not been addressed to. And I think this has also been referred to in some of the writings of Sanjeev Barwa, an old friend of mine, where he talks of this as a very important challenge and a very important poser to the nation state. It's good. We have created homelands. We have had a great experiment. We have done much better than many Western countries in the context of ethnicity and ethnic consciousness. But then the problems are gradually coming to the surface now. And this is what I refer to as the problems that the Indian nation state would have to see. Now, we are moving to a lot of silent voices. It's not only, smaller ethnic communities where you have an ethnic homeland. It's not just, different, people in a heterogeneous region like in Bodoland where ideas of ethnic cleansing have come in despite the burden of history. But it is also the question of a huge area of migrant labor. No one has ever tried to work on this. You see, the entire construction process, the road building, the real estate, everywhere you find labor from the rest of India, particularly from Bihar and UP. And every year almost, you find reports in the newspapers that 2 or 3 or 4 or a dozen of migrant labor have been eliminated, shot dead, either in Manipur or in Mizoram. Mizoram, I think 2 years ago, 15 of them building a road were all shot off because they didn't want outsiders. And in Manipur, it's become a recurrent phenomenon. And now, you find that there's a lot of talk about introduction of the inner line permit and the identification of non-Manipuris by Manipuri militant organizations. I think that would lead to a very, very serious situation. So similarly, you have in Meghalaya. Meghalaya is now mulling the idea of introducing different permits, red, yellow and green, to its citizens. And in the process, you find that people who have been there for generations, in fact for centuries, would totally become semi-state or non-state individuals. And that is where I feel the question of ethnic rights and ethnic homelands and citizens' rights assumes new dimensions. Finally, I have a question here with which I would like to end with another 1 or 2 more points. That has the creation of new territorial spaces in the form of ethnic homelands solved the problem of alternate nationalism or community consciousness? It is in the nature of contradictions that a particular measure aimed at solving one issue is quickly followed by the emergence of new contradictions. In the case of the northeastern region, the creation of political and territorial space for one particular small nationality has not been the end of the problem. Rather, it has been the beginning of other problems, centered on citizenship rights and representative democracy. This is especially true because of the heterogeneous and complex nature of the region, where the process of different communities moving towards becoming nationalities is still on. It's still a process that's on. A mix of ethnicity and territoriality in the northeastern region has led to a highly volatile situation, and the Indian state is clearly unprepared for it. While the creation of new political spaces has brought in initial dividends to the nation state, as also for the respective small nationalities concerned, yet it has created a large segment of people who have been pushed to the status of second class or non-citizenship because in the new political spaces they are not allowed to be active participants in the nation-building process. While the rights of some were given constitutional recognition, the rights of other sections were marginalized. While the citizenship rights of ethnic nationalities were strengthened, others have been turned into non-citizens virtually. And you can refer to so many cases, and I think the case in Borderlands is a very pertinent example because it's a recent case. And then I've talked to the migrant voices. So now I think there's a very intricate relationship between representative democratic institutions, citizens' rights, community rights, and traditional structures of power. And here the question of justice comes in. How it will be resolved by the Indian nation state or by the consultations with civil society organizations or regional governments. I don't know, but I think it has to be resolved at some point or other. So the whole question that in a democracy, citizenship does not entail just some rights which the citizen carries with him or her, but it also entails active participation in the democratic process. And it is this second aspect of the right that stands even more marginalized in many parts of the northeastern region. So they have the right to vote, okay, but that's not the end of the matter. So this is one of the major challenges to the democratic process that arises in the region today. Can the Indian nation state go on creating more and more political space for ever-emerging new small nationalities without creating more and more areas of tension? The challenge today lies not in just accepting the rights of certain small nationalities, but in working out an arrangement where justice for individual citizens would not be compromised in the name of protecting ethnic rights. How the Indian nation state would go about this remains to be seen. But it definitely involves the participation of active citizens, I feel. So the creation of exclusive ethnic spaces is bound to subvert this aspect of citizenship, which I mean participatory democracy, as far as the segment of population which is not included in the community or nationality is concerned. Moreover, the exclusivist nature of ethnic movements ensures that large segments of the people who are outside the ethnic are not involved in the democratic process in full. It is a pity that even those ethnic movements aimed at ensuring the rights of certain small nationalities have left little space for other ethnic nationalities. Alpha is a very interesting example of this, the United Liberation Front of Assam. And if you go through its manifestos, it initially said, that all the other tribal nationalities would have to denationalize, would have to give up their individualities and become part of one Assamese nation. Now it's again shifted its position back to saying that we would ensure the rights of nationalities. But at no stage of its 20 years plus or almost 30 years struggle where more than 15,000 people have lost their lives, the United Liberation Front of Assam has at no stage prepared any agenda for the rights of small nationalities. So that is the way things are moving in the northeastern region. So I think this is a very major challenge that has come up, and I don't want to read from a particular quotation, but I think whenever heterogeneity and multiculturalism come in, problems related to exclusion obviously arise, because ensuring the rights of the majority community through constitutional and other measures leads to denying in some form or other the rights of other communities. Basic civil and political rights must not be seen only as a mechanism for individuals to pursue their private interests without interference, but as a mechanism of public participation in the construction of national identity and the political community. That's what I feel. Finally, I'm sorry if I don't sound strictly and nicely academic. It's also from my own experience of the region that I would like to sum up. As I said, the Indian experience of autonomy and ethnic homelands has reached a crisis stage. Because over the years, if you really count the number of dead, it is appalling. Because we are in the margin of a margin. We are in the periphery. I think only when suddenly, the numbers shoot up to hundreds, then you have a lot of national media attention and say that the Northeast is burning. But subterranean civil war has been continuing for a long time between the different ethnic groups. Very little focus was there on the huge, killings that took place of women and children, including when the Naga-Kuki conflict took place. And somehow or other, people don't like to talk about it because it relates to two major ethnic communities, the Kukis and the Nagas. And that too, not all the Naga tribes, particular Naga tribes are involved. So, this is a situation of a very subterranean sort of a civil war that is emerging. And in Assam also, because of the numerous autonomous councils that have been set up without proper homework being done. You suddenly find today people are very worried about Bodoland, and I don't want to be the prophet of doom, but let me tell you that in the next few years there could be much larger wide-scale violence between the Garos and the Rabha community over the autonomous council debate. The Garo community demanding that they be allowed to have panchayat elections. They don't want to be part of the autonomous council. And the Rabha saying that it's a very small group. They said that we want our autonomous council. So the whole concept of autonomy and the concept of, the second stage which comes to the territorial council, which you have in Bodoland or in the Karbi Anglong and Dima Hasao district of Assam. And I think if anyone really analyzes the type of violence that has occurred in Karbi Anglong, it's really chilling in the sense, really chilling in the sense that no one has been spared. Entire villages have been wiped out. So this is where I think everyone who is an Indian citizen needs to be concerned that the whole idea of citizenship rights, the idea of ethnic homelands, and the idea of constitutional provisions for that needs to be re-looked upon and revisited. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think you began by saying you had a lot of questions and you were not very sure what the answers were. In a sense, that's what such a lecture surely is supposed to do, is to stimulate us to think. Not because answers are easy, but because the questions cannot and will not go away. If I could just begin by asking you ended on a very interesting note. You said that there are those who are on the margins of the periphery, and they are noticed only at times of extreme violence. I was struck by the fact that the Mizo Accord was in the late 80s. That's when there were attempts at accords with the Bodos. Is there a pattern of incorporation of such groups who have insurgent movements through a process of accords, in some sense attempted with the Nagas, continuing now, accomplished with some large degree of success with the Lushais in the case of the Mizo Accord? Are you suggesting that the sheer heterogeneity of the region requires that one goes beyond these sorts of accords with these homelands? If so, debate was taking place on the Naga-Kuki clashes, in which over 3,000 people had died. There were less than 15 members in the House. This was pointed out by one of them. And this was reported, but nothing much happened. So, are you a little more hopeful now that because the way in which you pose the questions are very fundamental? You are raising fundamental questions about the dignity of the individual citizen. And I was trying to glean something positive out, and it seemed to me that the deeper impact of the constitutional process is to create spaces where the individual citizen's dignity has a significance all of its own. It could be of a woman, it could be of a child, it could be of someone who's defenseless, who ought to have the right to life. So has that genie been let out of the bottle? It troubles us when we look at paramilitary or military or violent excesses, or acts which are not constitutional or legal or humane in any way. But does it actually help to create spaces for this debate, not only at the center, but even, so to speak, at the periphery? Sorry, this is the last question that I thought I'd just provoke you.
Thank you, Vash. Do I answer it right now?
If you don't mind.
As I said, I have very few answers to questions here. But two things are very important. The Mizo Accord has been an exception of sorts, because Mizoram that way, apart from the Mars, the Chakmas, basically it was much more homogeneous, and the area involved was also much smaller. And I think it was partly also because of the MNF, which began as an anti-Indian movement primarily because of lack of developmental issues. Now, this is a very interesting point, I think, about when you talk of the Northeast, that there are certain militant organizations that have sprung out of deprivation. The MNF actually grew out of the Assam government failure to control the famine, and it is definitely had very strong economic reasons for coming into existence. So once I think the assurance of proper, economic development came, and Mizoram is one of the fastest developing states now in the Indian Union, not only in literacy but also in other aspects. So I think the problem was accepted, resolved to a particular extent, and it began with the full surrender of arms. So it is not an accord that should be taken as the accord which necessarily is followed by others. I'm happy you refer to it. But I think the larger question is about, the rights of smaller ethnic groups. Now it is said, this morning I was asked a question when I raised this. It says, what about the rights of workers in UP, or what about the rights of Bihari workers in Maharashtra, or what about the rights of, other workers? The constitution is meaningless for them. I know it's meaningless. But then there is always the possibility of some organized resistance at some time. I feel Mumbai was never Mumbai as it is because Mumbai has the tradition of one of the biggest and most potent trade union movements of the country, beginning with the CPI, S.A. Dowley, then Tata Samant, even George Fernandez. And now, with the rise of ethnic politics, one of the first casualties of ethnic politics is trade union solidarity. That we have to accept, and I feel that is one of the realities which we all accept. That is true also in Assam. Also in the field of peasant organizations, class organizations, they are the first casualties. So when you say that what would happen to the individual citizen, it is true that smaller ethnic groups will always have to fight to make their voice heard. They'll have to take on different, devices, different ways of protest, different ways of mobilizing opinion. But then there is also the possibility of proportional representation and the formation of councils. You can always have proportional representation from the different ethnic groups and give them a place in certain, councils where they will have a voice. Right now they have no voice at all. And as far as migrant labor are concerned, I think there must be legislation at the state level as well, which gives them protection from such, wanton killings or from such wanton, attacks. So until and unless that is done, combined with another very important point I feel, which is quite often overlooked, it said that a lot of money is poured into the northeast which goes down the drain. It doesn't go down the drain, it goes into the coffers of the armed outfits, it goes into the pockets of the politicians. I think almost 70% of the funds or maybe more are actually misutilized. And that is also true with the different autonomous councils that have come up. But if proper distributive justice is ensured, and that is what I feel one of the greatest failings of the Indian nation state, despite all the programs that they've taken, and this is where I think a lot of activism, a lot of, proactive steps need to be taken. And it's not just, showing sympathy for the Northeast, saying that we are helping the Northeast, but it's more, feeling for a part of your own, country, which actually has a very different tradition. I have always felt that the perceptions of freedom of many of the nationalities of the Northeast is so different from perceptions of freedom in the other parts of the country. So we cannot forget the fact in 60 or 70 years that the larger part of the Northeast was not a part of the freedom struggle, excepting for the Assam Valley, the Bharat and the Brahmaputra Valley. The greater mass was never part of the freedom struggle at all. So when we try to bring them in, and I am very happy to say that the Indian Constitution has proved to be very resilient if we compare our condition with what has happened in Sri Lanka, where there has been total elimination, what has been happening in Myanmar, what is happening in Pakistan, what is happening in most of the African countries that attained independence in the 50s. I think our record that way, despite all the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and all the killings of the state, which we condemn unequivocally, I think still the resilience of the Indian Constitution must be accepted. That at different stages the Constitution has been amended to accommodate. I think even now there needs to be an amendment of two things. One is amendment of the 6th schedule, which should not be seen as sacrosanct. You really shouldn't be afraid that if they touch the 6th schedule, they touch, something very sacrosanct. It has to be changed to accommodate other ethnic groups and to accommodate women in the proper, reservation that is given in the 73rd Amendment. Traditional structures of power, which are there in our land, the village council, the range council, they had it much before. They had it even before the British came. They have a structure of power. Now those traditional bodies must be changed or made to change to bring in representation of women in the decision-making process, to bring in other smaller ethnic groups in the process. Because Nagaland has a huge history of inter-tribe warfare, and even today, if you talk of the Naga underground, I think the main problem today is the question of inter-tribe friction. That is exactly where it comes. Now, my third point about you, which in answer to you is, that when you refer to the Naga Accord or these accords, I think what sort of a space are we out to create? There's a demand that Nagas living in Assam or in Arunachal Pradesh or in any other part of Northeast should all come together under one territorial unit. But I think the founding fathers of our constitution thought of a more composite society. A society where you have people from different stands, different languages living together. So are we going against that whole philosophy of creating a more composite society, or are we just to expedite accord with a very strong militant group? We are trying to say that all right, we'll try to integrate all of you, at least if not territorially, we'll integrate all of you culturally. And I think that whole concept of cultural integration is a dangerous concept, because it goes against the whole idea of a composite country. That's what I feel. That we have to learn. There are thousands of Nagas who have lived on the Assamese within the borders of the state of Assam, and borders are always straight. These are man-made borders. So I think that raises a very fundamental question of living together, and that's why I say that we must move from fragmentary spaces to a more inclusive social space.
I have a couple of questions. Just request whoever speaks to introduce herself. Please use the mic. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, sir. I'm Subir. I'm from JNU. I'm doing my PhD. Thank you, sir, for such an extensive and very insightful lecture. You've covered such a long ground in such a short time. My question is, in your observation and study of autonomous spaces, have you come across the concept of non-territorial autonomy? And if so, could you enlighten us on that? And has it been in the discourse of the discussion of autonomous spaces in the case of Northeast? And could this concept be of any relevance to the case of nationalities in the Northeast? Thank you.
Thank you, Subir. Yes, non-territorial, the concept of non-territorial autonomy has figured several times. There have been a lot of examples from different European countries, that's been brought in, I think the Sumu Council and all that. But I still feel that when you talk, first of all, it's a problem of one particular ethnic group saying that, this is me and that is the other. Let us begin with that. That the other always figures is very important, isn't it? And that is why I am what I am. Now, there is where you come to a concept of exclusivism, right? All ethnic movements in the long run are bound to be exclusivist. Let's accept that fact. Now, after accepting that fact, when you move on to the point that can there be autonomy which is of a non-territorial nature, then that autonomy would have to be some form of cultural autonomy. And that type of autonomy has already been granted in all these different, sectional provisions and so on. That customary laws, right over land and resources, right over your, beliefs and traditions and culture are there. So, as far as these states are concerned, or these regions, territorial regions are concerned, I think there is a large degree of cultural autonomy. The problem arises when there becomes the monopoly of political autonomy, excluding all the others from the concept. As far as it is a cultural concept, you can try it out. But given the situation and given the pusillanimity of the government of India, you'll find that one step from cultural autonomy, the next step will be territorial autonomy. You see, it's like that. And that is exactly, and then the third step from territorial autonomy is the creation of a state, as you say. And not a state like any other Indian state, but a state where you'll have 80 or 90% reservation of seats for your own people. So that is where the non-citizens come in. That is where the question of the democratic rights of individual citizens come in. And that is not true. That's what I feel.
Yes. Please use the mic.
Thank you. I'm Civil. I'm doing my postdoctoral from JNU.
I was trying to clarify, to seek clarification more or less. Like when you try to actually say that most of the binaries that work in India or mainland India do not work in the space demarcated as Northeast. How actually is it possible to look forward towards a general point of view? Because there is, on the one hand, the relation of the ethnic minorities with the constitution, and on the larger scale, there is also the question of national minorities with nationalism. So, constitution seeks to make an exemption with respect to the territory demarcated as the Northeast, whereas nationalism makes exceptions with particularly the Dalits and the Muslims. So, in what respect can you merge the constitution and the national in coming to a desirable vantage point of the political, if you look at it from the point of view of a social scientist, where actually you cannot say ethnicism excludes nationalism, or nationalism does not, or nationalism excludes ethnicity.
Thank you, sir. It's a very, very interesting question. I don't know whether I'll be able to answer it to your satisfaction. But I've never said ethnicity excludes nationalism. Nationalism is a stage which develops through ethnicity. But I'm talking of ethnic homelands mainly. I'm talking of the creation of political spaces through the intervention of the Indian nation state. I'm not talking of sovereign, democratic movements or national liberation movements, or movements where you talk of creating a sovereign independent country. I'm not talking of that. I'm basically talking of governmentalized reaction to ethnic demands. And that is where the intervention of the nation state, which is not a prepared intervention without enough homework, that is what I was referring to. So my scope of my lecture is quite limited that way. But nonetheless, since you have said about the binaries, I think the basic difference, and some of my friends here, I think Rajesh is also here, could enlighten me. One of the basic differences of the binaries between, I still say that it is not Northeast, it is a particular northeastern region of the country which has a lot of diversities. The Brahmaputra Valley, the Barak Valley has very little in common with eastern Nagaland or some parts of Manipur. So it's an extremely diverse situation we are dealing with. But nonetheless, I think it's on the question of structured hierarchy, which expresses itself in caste, embedded in caste. Basically, that is largely not applicable to the hill regions of the Northeast. That is what I referred to as the binary not applying. Because your structured hierarchy of caste, which is there at every point of life, when you come to mainland India, does not apply there. I would just like to give you a very small example. It may be very anecdotal, I'm sorry. But let me tell you that there was a time when we were teaching in a very small university in Dibrugarh, right? It's more closer to Myanmar and even to China than perhaps to the Indian mainland. But there, at that time, we had plenty of Naga students. I'm just giving you a question of binaries and of perceptions. And while we were discussing so many things, we had a lot of friends there. And one boy who had come from eastern Nagaland, I forget the area, it was a very, very interior area. We were discussing questions of poverty. He said, "Sir, I had never seen a beggar till I came to Guwahati railway station." This might sound extremely, unreal for people, but I think it was a very real, sincere statement. He said, "The first time I saw it." He said, "We come from a very poor village, but we share our poverty." So that is where, there are the differences that come in many ways. This is just an example of a binary. Because then you have the beggar and the person who feeds the beggar is a common thing that is there. So I'm mainly talking of the structured hierarchy of caste that comes in. Secondly, you talked of the national minorities. You talked of the religious minorities, I think. And I think many scholars have reflected on this very seriously. One of them is Ranavi Samadar. And he refers to it as the paradox of nationhood and autonomy, which comes in. And the paradox also involves the binary between a common civil code and personal laws. So those binaries are accepted. I feel those come in whenever you talk of the Indian situation. But I think when you talk of particular stages of development in tribal society, the binaries could be very different. But that was just an observation. If someone tells me that they don't work, are we ready to accept it? Thank you so much.
Thank you for a very enlightening lecture. I'm not a social science person, so maybe my questions will be very simple. Firstly, whenever we talk about gender discrimination and discrimination against women, and people, sometimes there are talks who always invariably include the ethnic communities also as the subjugated lot like the women. Now, I want to ask you, the Khasis, their social structure is matriarchal. Now, do they have the same kind of gender issues as the non-ethnic communities or other communities in India, or do they have some specific gender issues? And also, what is the status of their empowerment of women among the Khasis?
First of all, and thank you for the question. Khasis are not matriarchal, they are matrilineal. Basically, they're not matriarchal. But actually in Khasi society, I think there are better scholars here present, I know. But from whatever little I know, in Khasi society, the youngest daughter is just a custodian of the property. She can't take any decisions that way without the maternal uncle coming in the way. And secondly, matrilineality or whatever you call it, has not given freedom to Khasi women at all. It's different, they have freedom in business, they run the business, they add to the income, they are, that way, it appears very egalitarian and very good for women, and that's true also. It's very different from the rest of India. But when it comes to exercising social control, or when it comes to representing women in political bodies, traditional bodies, district councils, or in assemblies also, it's been a big failure. And I still remember there was a discussion in the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. This came from a Khasi lady. When this question came up, there was a discussion. She stood up and said, hens are not supposed to crow. Right? So that I think sums up the present situation. There's a lot of change in Khasi society, a lot of demand for gender equality. There is no gender equality in traditional societies.
So you will all agree that this has been a most stimulating and significant lecture. It did occur to me that there are very large changes on the anvil because of the Look East policy, the prospect of much deeper ties between India and ASEAN. The Northeast, not just in what is often marketed as a gateway of India to East Asia, but also as literally a crossroads for much deeper and wider economic exchange. Excellent works in recent years on Laos, on Vietnam, post-socialism, on the prospects of the transformation of Burma, of southern China, may create a context in which some of these tensions become sharper. They may also create possibilities where there are opportunities for different kinds of cooperative agreements. I'd love to ask you about that, but I really think we ought to end today and show our appreciation for what has really been a fascinating lecture by a very distinguished scholar on a very important issue.
I think the last words, I'd like to thank all of you for being so patient, giving me a patient hearing, and I would like to say a formal word of thanks to Mahesh. I think it would be incomplete if I don't say it. He has been instrumental in reinvigorating the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and I hope and I wish and all my good wishes are with him in this endeavor of his.
It's a team effort, and I think all of you are part of that wider team. Thank you.